So let's talk about some of the elements of effective partnership compensation. First of all, one of the basic ground rules that we try to set up as we look at an effective partnership is everybody involved, and this is for every business that I've created as a partnership. Now, you may have a different philosophy for why you're in business, and unfortunately, if your philosophy around business as an asset departs from what I say here, then you will have some difficulty implementing what I'm going to talk about next. So let me just explain what business as an asset philosophy is. In our world, all the partners agree that we are in business. We are in the process, in the service of customers from a strategic and operational standpoint to create an asset that through leveraged means delivers service to our customers. That means that as we go forward in time, we as business owners may be necessary to implement the things that need to be done in the business ahead of time, in the beginning, with the understanding that at some natural point in the business's life cycle, we will be able to retire from that business, continuing to own it as an asset. So we all agree that we're not in the business to work for the business. We're ultimately in the business to eventually step away from the business and have it continue to operate and serve customers without our personal interaction. That's a very huge assumption that I would not suggest that you simply assume because you're in business with somebody. But if you are going to be a partner with somebody, it is very, very important for you to get very clear as to why you are in business and why they are in business. Let me give you a competing narrative. The competing narrative is that a lot of people believe that their lives have value from the service that they personally deliver to others. So you have a lot of people who are service professionals that feel this way, and they're very valid. They may be doctors, they may be lawyers, they may be accountants, they may be bookkeepers, people who have a sense of belonging and self-worth from the job that they do for others. These people are generally very difficult to be business partners with, simply because they focus on value coming from their service in the business. And there's a certain scalability that the business will never be able to achieve because that model is a limited model. It's a very, very successful model, but it's by the very nature of the constraints involved around the business owner, the self-employed business owner, the scaling is not possible. So if you're in business with somebody who sees their worth and sees your worth from the work that you do, run for the hills if this is a model that you wish to adopt. If this is the model that you wish to adopt, then you're looking to have somebody work with you, and everybody understands that at some point in the game, and as quickly as you can effectively do this without damaging quality, you are looking to operationally exit the business, or at least have the option to do so. This is a very important assumption. So, a business as an asset philosophy really does center around being able to, all the business owners and all the partners being able to exit the business operationally as quickly as possible while retaining their equity-based compensation. That's a huge, huge distinction. If your philosophy around why you're in business is cohesive and synergistic with your partners along those lines, then the creation of a separated compensation model becomes very appropriate. What does that mean? That means that if you are an owner in the business and you work for the business, as in you perform duties and tasks in the business that the business needs to be able to go forward, and you are quote unquote the only person that can do that because it's your business and you need to make it move along and you need to get things done, what I strongly suggest is you take a look at all of the things that you do for the business, and if your services are required, that you compile and value those operational duties at some appropriate market value. So some market value, if what you do for the company, if you were going to replace yourself with a person that was going to perform the task, what would they make? Would they make $15 an hour, $20 an hour, $200 an hour, $2,000 an hour? I don't know how valuable your skills are to your business, but you want to think about who you'd need to hire and what it would cost if you were going to replace yourself or anybody else in your business, specifically yourself and your partner, for what you physically and literally do for the business. The reason that's important is because it sets the stage for a very effective financial model between the two of you. Next, you want to take a look at your contribution to the company. So in determining how you are going to come to a valuation of your own percentages of ownership, this comes now to being able to determine what I bring, what you bring, and how we're going to go about valuing it. I'll give you an example. Two partners get together. One of them is a salesperson. The other person has really great technical skills. One person is bringing $10,000 of cash to the party. The other person is bringing a network of people that he knows he can go solicit for increased business. I would tell you that the fact that one is a salesperson and the other one is a technical specialist, those two roles have an operational compensation model that makes sense in the marketplace. So if those roles were going to be bought on the street with employees, there would be some appropriate salary that would go to each one of those people. So I'm saying here that you create the market value, you know exactly what the technical work and the sales work is going to be worth, whether it's commission based or if there's an hourly rate in there, doesn't matter. Just make sure you get it and it's just about right. Then the person who's bringing the capital to the party should be given equity as a result of their capital contribution, or maybe it's a loan to the business, but basically the idea is you separate the levels of contribution and then you compensate that contribution appropriately. Now there are many ways you can do this, but I strongly usually recommend that if you're going to have cash, then cash gets some form of equity if it's not actually a loan, and that if you are bringing any type of intellectual property or if you're bringing any kind of collective capability, that means that there's some contribution you make to the business that's not cash, but it's a tool or a really great system that the business has the ability to use, then that too, that if you personally stop working for the company and that contribution continues to benefit the company, that's the test of sustained compensation. And that sustained compensation can either come in the form of equity. You can have a lease with that thing. So if it's a network, you can lease the network, or you can lease the given piece of machinery or whatever it is. Or you can make it a part of the contribution of the person if it's going to stay and actually benefit the company. So that way, it's very clear why a particular partner is getting paid. That's really what we're after. We're after making sure that we're not confusing what you do for the company with what you've given to the company to determine what you own in the company, and the same for your partner. Now, the understanding here is once you have effectively separated your operational compensation, getting paid for what you do, from your equity compensation, getting paid for what you've contributed, now you make a system where if for whatever reason you need to begin to back away operationally from the business, you now have an opportunity to redirect an already established budget to replace yourself with a person that's already at market value because you did it in the first place. Does that make sense? The idea here is that as you want to back away from the business and truly transform it into that asset class that we've been talking about, you already have the budget in place to take care of that person operationally, taking care of their salary, while you as a business owner hopefully continue to collect your equity-based compensation, and it would have gone up because the hope is that you would have grown with the business so that it would pay you from equity as opposed to your job. Now, where a lot of businesses go very, very wrong is they have a 50-50 split, two partners are in it doing all the work, and there's no way to separate them from the business when it's time for them to move on. If they have a life issue, if they get sick, if for whatever reason they need to move on, or if they prove incompetent and they need to bring on more help, because their compensation a lot of times is just based on a big lump sum that included what they were supposed to be doing in addition to whatever the business was supposed to be netting them. There's no way for them to carve out any money for themselves because they've never really planned for it. And so somebody in the system is going to get very upset. Either the person that can't leave because they're trapped in a job that they're either not working, the business owner is trapped in a place where he's not able to truly recover because he's not able to discern what part of his payment, his compensation, can truly be touched. And as a matter of, it's very difficult to in the middle of the process justify giving yourself a reduction in pay, especially when your business is doing well enough for you to even consider backing off or backing down or taking more time off. So the way that we approach it is take care of all the conflict and the potential for conflict on the front side. Do everything in your power to separate your operational from your equity compensation so that each becomes a component that stands on its own and that you're able to part. So when it's time for you to actually back off or get more help or to replace yourself operationally in the business, or in the worst case scenario, you guys get into a conflict and you decide you can't work together anymore, at least there is already a fair compensation model existing for either the contribution that you've made so you can continue to get paid even if you left the operational responsibilities to someone else in the business because you and your partner can't reconcile. So this is a model that allows for businesses to be sustained even in the face of irreconcilable conflict. They don't have to dismantle the business because the partners can't work together anymore. There is still a way to at least continue a fair model of compensation, still get the work done, while the partners figure out how to dispose of the asset in a much more meaningful manner and not actually affect people getting paid fairly throughout the time. And then the idea for all business owners, as we said before, is to seek to move away from the operational compensation of the business. So you eventually get to a place where you no longer need to work for the business. You can replace yourself with somebody that you can hire, and that makes a lot of people happy. Well, I get the question, well, that's nice, but what happens if I don't have any cash at the beginning? How do I compensate for operational duties when I don't have cash to actually pay out? I mean, we just started our business, or for whatever reason cash is low, and I don't even have enough money to pay my business bills. How do I make this work without cash in the system? Well, that's fine too. So the way that you deal with it is you still have that operational component that we're talking about. This is the operational component that's responsible for paying out what would be wages or salary for work being done. You need to be able to compensate work. So if you're not able to actually give cash to the person who is doing the work, this is where you can start to grow equity. And what I'm suggesting here is a model for sweat equity that is feasible, that is reliable, structured, and it's easily calculated. You can see exactly how much sweat equity a person is creating in your business because you know exactly how much you're not paying them in cash as they work. And this is a way for people who are in partnership. One person has the capital to be able to create the business, the other person has the expertise, but to mitigate the risk of the person who's bringing the capital, and as I've gotten older, I've understood why the capital contribution is absolutely so important to protect, and the partner bringing that capital contribution needs to have their risk minimized. The idea here is to create a growing compensation allocation in a liability account that allows for the person to very much see how much the business owes them as a function of time that can then be converted to equity at some appropriate vesting period. So if there's no cash, there's at least a way to quantify just how much you are creating in sweat equity for the business, and your partners are being able to create for sweat equity in the business, and then you can work with a lawyer to determine what percentages get owned after a period of time when the business can now afford to pay its bills and pay people for the work that they've done. Now, to be able to support this particular method of accruing partnership allocations for sweat equity, you really need accurate balance sheet accounting, because before that process even happens, the capital contributions of the owner need to be properly calculated, and the equity. And as we debuted the balance sheet in the overview section, and where we have an entire section just on the balance sheet in the understand it section. So the understanding here is you need to get the balance sheet absolutely right to be able to know that your allocated amounts for your other partners, if they're the ones that have sweat equity, or if you're the partner that's buying into a business with your sweat equity, you need to make sure that it's fair and it's properly calculated so that everybody remains properly compensated and the shares of equity in the business are properly calculated for proper distribution, especially when you're looking to get away from the operational responsibilities that you have. Okay, next, you want to check with your accountant about deferred compensation rules before you enact this process. So the idea here is that you work with your accountant to figure out the best way to reflect the deferred compensation that is likely to be converted into equity at some point in time. Because if you're not going to have it distributed to you, then at least it's a fair way of knowing exactly how much value you have built into the business, while knowing exactly what you've taken out in the form of pay because of the work that you've done. Now, I personally have a rule. If you're going to be a partner of mine, the rubric is very simple. If you're going to look to get paid a lot of money up front for your work, then it will cost you in the amount of equity you're able to demand as you go forward in time. So the more equity you want, especially in a potentially cash-strapped environment, the less operational compensation that you're probably going to get. And somewhere in there, there's a fair balance. It's not exactly fair for somebody to get paid a lot of money up front and demand lots of equity if the business is not able to truly sustain it. Now, you also have an opportunity to agree about equity that's held in capital accounts. And a capital account is an allocation that exists that keeps track of the money that you have put into the business, or in some cases, if you have a very, very astute accountant, they can help you convert your sweat equity into some kind of capital account within your equity column and have that be reflected appropriately. Again, you want to have a very in-depth discussion with your accountant to see how they can facilitate this process for you. But the idea here is that you have absolute flexibility around what happens with the money inside your capital account. And I'll give you some examples. There are some businesses that determine that money that an investor, so you as an investor in your own business, put money into your capital account. Your capital account tracks, maybe you invested $100,000 of your own cash into your business, and you have an investor that comes in and does the same. You guys can make rules among yourself depending on the type of corporate structure you have, and of course with a lot of help from your professional advisors, particularly your business attorney and your accountant. But the rule can exist that you say, well, if I were investing this $100,000 in the stock market or in government tax-free bonds, for instance, you would get some percentage return on your money. So we'll just say 5%. So you can say, well, I had a choice. I could either put this money into the business or I can get 5%. So in addition to whatever equity distribution you get from the ownership of stock in your business because of the investment, you can also do things like charge interest on your capital account, where your capital account actually grows in interest at some fixed level as a function of time. These are all toggles that you have. The idea, however, is to communicate fairly what it is you think, what your capital you believe is worth to the business, and how it's going to be treated. Because again, this is kind of a canvas, and all of these things are just blobs of paint that you can make your own picture with. And the idea is the story is yours to tell, and you have many, many tools to tell it with. So you can determine that you want an interest-bearing capital account. So not only do you get some form of equity compensation from the ownership of shares, but the actual money that you put in can also grow at some appropriate amount. Now, mind you, what you make in interest, a lot of times you will have to lose in the valuation of the amount of money that you get through distributions. These are all things that must balance each other out and still remain fair. Again, in any sustainable partnership, the perception of fairness is probably one of the most important things that you have to be paying attention to at all times. So it's not just about you getting paid as much as you can be for your contribution into the business, but rather focusing on creating a balance and working with your partner to really create a fair deal for yourselves and for the business. The idea here is not to take the business for a ride. The idea is to give the business what it needs to be able to be successful so it can turn around and compensate you indefinitely. Again, I think that's the goal for all of us. And of course, once you have all of the different rules around equity, you want to get these rules described in your operating agreement or bylaw. So you want to work with an attorney now to reflect everything that you agreed to in writing to the best of your ability. The idea here is, in my opinion and in my experience, it's amazing how fluid the human memory is. So in coming to a number of agreements with people and being able to determine exactly what you all agreed and having a record of exactly what you're agreeing on, it's always amazing to see the drift in the narrative that partners tell that determine it's amazing how diverse the same story can be with what was agreed to, especially if things were not recorded or written down or captured anywhere. So save yourself a lawsuit and a bunch of heartache by making sure that you get a lot of what you agreed to written down. And the other part that I'll mention here, and then we'll move on, is that the understanding is that this agreement is malleable. It's a living document. So it's not that you just create it once and it stays there and it's like that forever. The document will grow as you do. So create a schedule to come back and look at it and talk about it on a regular basis.